Today is August 3rd, 2013, 11:15 a.m., and we're sitting with Linda Herschberg. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, if you don't mind, starting with
Where I was born.
where you were born.
Okay. Actually, I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my family was mostly in that area. And when I was 9, my parents got divorced, and so my dad stayed in that area, and my mom and sister and I moved to Sacramento, California, because her brother and his family lived there, and she just kind of wanted to break away from everything at that point in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And so she sold everything we had, and we were allowed to bring one toy and a few clothes. I remember that because it was so stressful having to get rid of everything. And but then we drove to Sacramento, and my uncle was in the Air Force, and my aunt didn't work, so she was able to help take care of my sister and I after school and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
We lived there for 4 years. My mom worked for J.F. Shea Company, which was the construction company that built the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And she met my stepdad there because he was the company pilot.
Oh.
So that was really cool.
Yeah.
So when they were dating, we got to go flying in this private plane down to Disneyland or wherever, and so that was a lot of fun. Anyway, when they got married, we moved to Southern California, to Glendora, and that's where we went to junior high and high school. My parents had jobs there, and it was quite a shock moving from middle school age, 7th grade,
right,
to Southern California, even though we lived in Sacramento, which is a pretty big city, but it was quite a different atmosphere. So that was an adjustment. But after that, then they sold our house in Glendora and moved to Laverne, which is just a couple cities away.
Right.
And my sister, when she graduated from high school, moved out with some friends, and I stayed and went to college at Cal Poly in Pomona, and stayed at home for expense reasons, and just commuted, which is only about 10 miles away from where we lived. So I met Jim in high school, my husband. He and I were both in biology when he was a senior and I was a junior. And so we started dating then, and then we both went to Cal Poly together. And I was just about ready to graduate. I still had a couple months to go. And Jim was working for a car dealership down there in the parts department. And there was an older guy that worked with him there, and he was getting ready to retire back to Denver, where he was from. So he was getting the Denver classified ads and things, and he was teasing Jim, saying, well, if you really want to get out of the big city, here's a place in Craig, Colorado, that needs a parts manager at the Chevrolet dealer. So on a whim, Jim called him up, flew out here, looked at the town and everything, and we looked on the map, and it was really close to Steamboat Springs, and we were both snow skiers. And so we thought, well, what better time than just to do it now before we get, start a family or anything. So he came back. I picked him up at LAX, and in the car he said, well, how do you feel about getting married and moving to Craig? So we got married in a week.
Wow.
He came up here to start work here, and then I wanted to finish college, of course. I just had 6 weeks left at that point. So then he came back after I graduated, and we just packed the rest of our stuff up and moved up here.
Wow.
And it was a real culture shock at first, because there was no commercial, fast food places. There was a small Kmart over where Murdoch's is right now.
Okay.
And they had a JCPenney store downtown. But that was kind of the only familiar names of anything that I'd seen. So it was quite the adventure, and the people it was Cook Chevrolet where we first started to go to work. And it was a boom town. It was 1976. and the place was booming. There was no place to live. People were living in campers, tents, trailers, because the power plant was being built and the mines were adding things on, adding on to their production, and
Right.
all the auxiliary businesses that go along with that, like the power lines and everything else. But Larry Cook had a trailer on the north end of town that we could rent. So we went to live in this trailer out north of town, and it was next to Fortification Creek. And not long after we moved here, in June, we had a snowstorm that dumped 18 inches of snow.
In June.
In June. So that was a shock. And then it was about a couple weeks later, there was a report of a black bear along the creek. So I was freaking out.
Yeah.
Looking for a bear, and we had a large dog at the time, and I remember we were in the mobile home, and he had his food dish in the kitchen, but he was in the bedroom with me, and we heard all this crunching noise in the kitchen by his dog food bowl. So I peeked around the corner. Of course, I was picturing a bear or something in there. I peeked around the corner, and here's all these little mice that were in the dog dish eating the dog food. So I really wasn't too fond of setting traps and emptying the mouse traps, but there were some kids next door that thought it was great entertainment. So I would make cookies for them if they would empty the mouse trap.
Oh, that's great.
So that was my first month or so here in Craig. Also, I had played tennis in college, and there were some high school age girls living next door to us too. So we would walk down to the park down here, and I would give them tennis lessons just for something to do. But they were more interested in the boys driving by. So we didn't get very far with that. Then Larry Cook's wife was a teacher at Sunset. And so she introduced me to the principal over there, and I got a job as a teacher's aide.
Okay.
So in the fall, I started out as the teacher's aide at Sunset Elementary. After that, which was a lot of fun, and the town had a lot of transient people, and so a lot of the kids were kind of unsettled because their families were unsettled, and so I worked a lot with those kids that, just had a lot of missing pieces in their education, and just worked with the teachers. And really, when I first started, the teachers' aides did a lot of things like bulletin boards, and you didn't really work with the kids all that much. But the teachers I worked with, they knew my background, so they let me work with kids for reading and that kind of thing. And that year, at the end of that year, budgets were being cut severely. So I was one of the last ones hired, so I figured I was going to need to look for something else. And one of the teachers that I worked with, her husband was manager of a real estate office in town, and he needed receptionists, that kind of thing. And I had no experience with that, but they were willing to train me. So they said, well, why don't you come work for us? So I thought, well, that worked out well. I guess I'll just go for it and see what happens. That was called Flanagan Realty, and their main office is in Montrose, which is south of Grand Junction area. And they had a private plane, and they flew me down for the interview, and it was really, really rough weather. And I'd flown in small planes before, with my stepdad being the pilot, but it was so rough, I finally had to say, I'm going to get sick here, do you have something I could use? And so I got sick going down, but it didn't take too long. We got down there, and by the time we got there, the office had closed, but he took me to a restaurant there, and the whole office and all their friends and everybody was down having a big party. So I ended up being there basically as on a party. And they would train me in between how to do the bookkeeping and everything for the office.
Yeah.
So when it was time for me to come back, about 4 or 5 days later, the weather was so rough they weren't sure they were going to be able to take off on the plane. And we waited and waited and waited, and finally the pilot said, well, I think we can just sneak up through the valleys and follow the road up to Craig. And again, it was so rough that I didn't lose, any lunch that day. But it was kind of scary, just because flying over the mountains is a lot different with all the updrafts and everything. Your small planes especially are like a roller coaster ride. So that was my experience with that. And I worked for the real estate office for several years. Things were so busy that back then it was before computers and everything. You had to hand type all the contracts and all that thing. I would have the salesmen lined up, like literally right next to my desk, because they needed stuff typed up as far as buying and selling properties and stuff. So it was fun and it was exciting because you knew what companies were moving into the town and which ones were leaving. And after about 8 years, the boom died down. And so a lot of people kind of shuffled around as far as what real estate offices they were working for, and I kind of went down to part-time, and then finally I just said, you guys really can't afford to pay me anymore because you're just not making anything. And so one of the managers' wives took over the bookkeeping part of it, and I just did some part-time bookkeeping for other places, and went looking for a job. I was looking around town for jobs, and I was in the courthouse going from office to office to see if they needed office help. And I was down in the basement where, at that time, the Sheriff's Department and Social Services was. And a friend of mine worked at Social Services, and she saw me walking down the hallway, and she came out and grabbed me. She said, we need someone right away. So I started working for Social Services.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Seems like all these jobs kind of found
to me. Well, that's kind of how it went.
That's really neat.
Yeah. And, I've rarely had to have much of an interview anywhere, and in all the different things I've done. So I went to work for Social Services, and I thought with my humanities background, I did have enough psychology, sociology classes that I could become a caseworker. So I was kind of heading that direction, and the supervisors there were all for that too, because I was kind of a caseworker aide. I was doing all the court reports and all that stuff for child abuse. And they sent me to Denver for the caseworker training and all of that. And at that time, Jim and I were wanting to start a family, but it just wasn't working out. And having to deal with the child abuse and not being able to have kids, it was just too emotionally straining for me. So after a couple of years, I decided, there wasn't any caseworker openings up to that point, and I just decided I just can't do this. It's too hard for me. So one of the ladies that was working there, her husband worked at the gas company where Jan used to work, and said, well, they need a bookkeeper at the gas company. So I applied for that. And I did have to do an interview with Jan and a few other people at the gas company. It's called Greeley Gas. and got hired for that position. So I was doing something emotionally safe, doing bookkeeping, and worked there for 5 years.
Wow.
And in the course of that 5 years, we had really severe weather where it was so cold that we couldn't produce enough gas to the customers, and we had to shut everybody off for a while and then make sure the lines were full flow again and then turning them back on. So we had to answer phones around the clock 24/7.
Why?
And
Wow.
yeah, during those times, that was kind of interesting. After that 5 years, I got pregnant with our son Matthew, and so we decided that I would stay home for a while with him and not work, or just do a little bookkeeping for different companies. And so after Matthew was born, I stayed home and I did a little bookkeeping here and there, and I ended up doing some bookkeeping for Dan's father.
Oh.
And Dan, they had a business with vending machines, and they just had little day reports they had to do once in a while. It wasn't a whole lot, but got me out of the house a little bit. And I had a friend in town that did daycare, so we would go and visit. So Matt got a little social interaction or whatever.
Right.
But then when Matt started kindergarten, he started at Sunset Elementary, and I decided that while I was in town, see, we lived 15 miles out of town. I kind of skipped all that part, but how that happened. But we lived 15 miles out of town, so when I brought him to kindergarten, it was only for a few hours, basically, and then I'd have to pick him up, or he'd have to ride. And at noon, they didn't have buses running out there, just in the morning and late in the afternoon.
Right.
So I thought, well, I may as well just volunteer in his classroom, and that way I can see what he's doing and make sure he's behaving.
Right.
Because he could be a little stinker sometimes. And then kind of have something to do while I was waiting around in town. So I volunteered for his kindergarten class, and then when he started first grade full day, I decided they had an opening for an aide again at Sunset. So I applied for that and got that job, so I was back at Sunset again after 20-some years.
Wow.
Yeah. Which worked out really well as far as being off when he had vacations and everything. So I worked there for 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And, saw a lot of changes from aides being the ones doing bulletin boards to actually doing instructional work with the kids, especially I worked with the Title I kids, so it was, the ones struggling with reading and math. And I really enjoyed working with small groups. Occasionally I'd have to fill in for the teacher while they were in meetings or whatever with the whole class, and that wasn't my favorite, but I did it. And then Matt went off to college at Fort Collins at Colorado State, and during his first year he got this illness where he has to be hospitalized a couple times a year, and we didn't know what it was, and I had to miss a lot of work, and so I went ahead and resigned my position there at the school so I could be where he was. We were going from hospital to hospital, and finally after about 8 months we got in touch with this doctor in LA, and he deals with this stuff all the time and knew how to treat it, and he takes medications and he has to be monitored for different things, but it's sort of under control, so he's back at school again, and even had an internship over there this summer at the jail with the chaplain. So,
right.
Yeah. So yeah. I kind of missed all the part about where we lived during all this time, because that's kind of important too. Jim and I like to play golf, so in the summer we play golf, and in the winter we skied a lot. But when we had Matt, we taught him how to ski up there and everything, but then, he liked doing it, but it wasn't that big a deal, and it was getting so expensive that we kind of stopped skiing and stuff, but mostly was involved with whatever he was doing, like playing soccer or whatever. But when we first moved to Craig, we were in that trailer, and we decided we really didn't want to stay there, so I sold my car for a down payment on a house in town. So when a smaller house in town, it was one that was originally from Mount Terrace, which was between here and Steamboat. It used to be a coal mining town that once it closed, they moved all the houses out and everything. So there's a bunch of houses here in town that were from there, and we bought one of those and lived there for a couple of years. And then that's when I was working at the real estate office, and this property out north of town came up available, and we decided we wanted to try that. So that's when we moved out 15 miles north of town next to Byzantiner's property, and that's how we got to know Dean Byzantiner.
Right.
Which has been awesome. And when we first moved out there was nothing out there. No neighbors, nothing. And we bought a modular and put it on a empty basement. And there was some perimeter fencing, but not a lot. And so we decided, let's have some horses. And I was around horses when I was younger in Minnesota. My uncle had horses there, but I was not involved with how much work they are and what's involved in taking care of them. So the whole lifestyle of building fences, building little barns, getting hay, which from year to year can be crazy depending on like last year was such a big drought. Hay was going for enormous prices, and if you could even find it. And 2 years where there's plenty of hay and no problem finding it. And then you have to find horseshoers, and then it just goes on and on. But we had horses for 30 years. I had my first horse was Paso Fino, and it's a little Spanish horse that has a natural 4-beat gait, so you don't bounce when they're trotting. It's just nice and smooth. And we got him when he was only 2 months old.
Wow.
And I had him till he was 30.
Oh my goodness.
So, and then we had a older roping horse for Jim, because the horse was more experienced and could teach him how to ride. And then we got an Arabian mare from my stepdad had friends in Southern California that raised him, and they gave him this mare and bred her, so she had the baby out there on our property.
Wow.
And so we had them for a while, and I trained my little Paso Fino to ride by myself. I didn't know much about training, but read a lot and asked questions a lot of people around here, and he ended up being more like a puppy dog, which a lot of people really don't care for, but I did. He was a lot of fun, and took him for rides. We never even had to trailer him anywhere because Byzantiners let us ride out on his property, which goes forever, and we could go up in the mountains. And we had one of his old sheep herders was named John Besso, and he was from Italy originally and came when he was a kid to this area and had all these experiences with the range wars between the cattlemen and the sheepmen, and all these crazy stories. And he would park his sheep camp in the spring and fall when they were moving the sheep past our place. And when his sheep camp was there, we would go and talk to him every night. We would talk and hear stories about what was going on in this area in the early, 1900s and stuff. And he liked to exaggerate, so we never knew what stories or what part of the stories were really true or not.
Right.
But it gave us a good feel for what it was like living here back then. And that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
So, what else can I
Well,
tell you about?
what was it like raising a family, raising your son in this community?
Well, we loved it out there,
Mhm.
out 15 miles north. And after a few years, other people started building houses. So now there's about 8 or 10 houses out in that general area.
Okay.
So, he wasn't totally isolated. We had, our first neighbors had 2 children that were older than him, but they babysat him, and he got to go over and, see him up and visit with him and when we weren't in town. One thing that was a little harder was it wasn't like living in town where you could just go see what neighbors were out playing.
Right.
He had to kind of find his own things to play with. And he had dogs, and we had the horses, and he didn't, the horses were okay, but he really wasn't interested in them, and he didn't like helping cleaning the barns and all that stuff. But he really did like the dogs. He got real attached to them. The smaller schools, especially working in the school district when he was going to school, I could keep tabs on what he was doing or not doing. And when he was in middle school, he started rebelling quite a bit. And he and a friend started playing guitars and started a heavy metal band. And his friend in town had this old shack in their backyard, and that's where they would go and practice and stuff. So we had to, make the effort driving him back and forth before he was driving. And then when he started driving, the biggest worry was hitting deer and elk on the highway, which he did do. He actually totaled 2 cars on the highway. Luckily, he wasn't hurt, but he totaled 2 cars.
Wow.
Between the time he started driving and when he went to college. So that was, we didn't have to worry about car traffic. We had to worry about wildlife traffic on the highways, especially after dark. Yeah. So, and then in high school, their band got pretty popular in the area, and they did a battle of the bands, and they got voted, the most popular band, and so the band had 2 older people in it. So when they graduated, they wanted to go on the road, and of course Matt did too. He was 15, and he wanted to go on the road too, and we, said no. And so he really rebelled then after that, and he wasn't turning in his schoolwork, and but we just had to take his privileges and everything away, and so he decided to do that, and he knew why. But growing up, sorry, they changed their name several times. I can't remember, but they were pretty popular. They sold T-shirts and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were kind of a Christian-based heavy metal band.
Awesome.
So even though the lead singer, I guess you could call him, was a screaming kind of thing, you couldn't really tell it was Christian lyrics. But it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then he kind of got back on track, and in a small town you can keep track of things a lot easier.
Yeah.
And if you're going to get in trouble, someone's going to let us know.
Right.
So I think growing up in a small town, you just are able to keep track of kids a little better that way.
Right.
So I think all in all it was pretty good. He said he had a lot of bad influences here, and he really likes Fort Collins and is really involved in religious things, and he's really involved with the church over there. In fact, this weekend he's doing the worship service this Sunday.
Wow.
He just called last night and told us that. And he's involved with Young Life, which he's a co-leader for the high school kids there, and they do healthy activities and that kind of thing. So it's great to see the direction he's taken.
Yeah.
And he's still involved in music a lot too. He plays his guitar, a lot of these things, and he does sound systems for different things. He was the DJ at his friend's wedding a couple months ago. So he's got that music interest and his religious interest, and he's taking criminology in college, so he likes that part of sociology too.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see where he goes with that.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah.
Along with the types of changes you've seen in school and raising Matt and everything, how have you seen the town itself change, especially like the downtown area?
The downtown area was pretty more Old West when we got here. I mean, it was pretty rough. There was still fights outside of bars. When we lived on Taylor Street, the next door neighbor got stabbed at the bar after night.
Wow.
One night after they closed. There was a place called the Rancho Deluxe. That was a big kind of warehouse building, and it was just a wild and crazy place.
Right.
During the boom when we first got here, they'd have T-shirt contests. They would have ladies' night where only women in there drinking for hours, and then they'd let all the guys in. And we usually left when that happened because it was just crazy. Pretty wild. We used to stop at the Cause Drift because a lot of our friends would go there after work and socialize there after work. Then things kind of, when things were dying down after the boom, just slowly things started coming in, like Taco Bell and McDonald's and Pizza Hut, and just very slowly.
Right.
And with them came, the people wanting to have more of the hometown feel too. So the downtown tried to stay more, individual ownership type of businesses, and then the mall went in and they, tried to commercialize more. And the mall kind of has its up and downs where it's half empty part of the time, and then times where it's all full. So things have kind of come and gone that way. And I think the town has just slowly developed, which might be more healthy development instead of the boom and bust type of development. And I think Steamboat Springs brings more stability to the workforce here who works up in Steamboat, because there's a lot of people that live here and work in Steamboat, but I think that gives it a more stable base here. Steamboat has grown like crazy. When we first started skiing up there, it was almost kind of a private, out-of-the-way place, and, you've been up there now, there's just condos covering the whole mountainside. And when we were first teaching Matt how to ski, even, 20 years ago, we could take him up for free and use the beginner's slope. We didn't have to pay anything until he got better and wanted to go up higher. But it was, it was a good place to go, but kind of priced out of our price range.
Yeah, now it's really expensive.
About $100 a ticket for a day.
Oh my goodness.
I think that's what it's going to be this year. So I think we started paying, we used to go up half a day, and it was about $12 for half a day. And then for a while, we could get a discount for being a local. And they gave a really good discount for that, like half price. But then the ski hill was bought and sold by different companies, and then they quit doing that. And our knees are not what they used to be either. But we still want to go up once in a while. I used to cross country ski out there, out by us, and I would take the neighbor kids when they were still pretty young, and we just bust our own trail out there and just follow the creek a little ways, and we'd stop and have a snack, and we'd look around, and one day a herd of elk came down because we were just sitting there quiet, and they came down and were just grazing down there by the river, and just all little footprints and stuff you'd see in the snow, and it was pretty fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's really changed here then.
I think so, yeah.
How do you feel about Craig now, its current state?
I think Craig is still on a healthy, the recession has hurt, but it's not as big of a swing as the 70s and 80s as far as the ups and downs of the boom and bust. And it'll still be energy driven, booms and busts, but the 70s and 80s when we were here seemed pretty extreme as far as, yeah, it was so crazy, and then oil shale and everything, the money got cut, and everybody just left. Businesses, everything left, and it was pretty bad.
Wow.
So there's a lot of real estate for sale now too. Yeah. But then it was like massive, empty houses. Wow. It seems pretty stable.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's just my viewpoint.
No,
I'm sure
that's
other
good,
people
yeah.
have different ones, but
Stable. Do you have any additional stories or anything you want recorded, just to have it down?
I was just thinking of when I was working at the real estate office. The Chamber of Commerce used to have a fundraiser. It was a big poker tournament. And what you did is you paid $100, you got $100 worth of chips. And that was your donation, basically. And when you were out of chips, you couldn't buy any more. That was it.
Right.
And it was a 2-night ordeal.
Wow.
By the first night, probably half the people were out of chips and were out of it.
Right.
And then the second night, they would have a Calcutta at the beginning of it, where people could bet on which player was going to win. So that was a whole separate pool of money that got split among the people. And then you'd play until, at the very end, whoever had the most chips, they'd have donated prizes for whatever.
Right.
Well, my dad taught my sister and I how to play poker when we were very young. He was kind of a gambler, and that's probably why they got divorced. but he was a lot of fun and taught us how to play, so I decided I was going to play in this one tournament. I thought, it's for good charity and, fundraiser thing. So I was the only female that made it to the second night.
Wow.
So a bunch of my friends were, betting on me to win and all this. And as people, run out of chips, they would condense down to other tables. And I was in the last table for the big finale. It was like midnight, the second night. They did this out at the fairgrounds at the pavilion. And so it was really exciting because all of us had a lot of chips, and just playing 7-card stud is what it was. And I was sitting next to this older gentleman who was like a professional gambler from Hayden. And so I had to keep a really close eye on him because he was like, knew what he was doing. And I was just doing it for fun, And I remember the grand prize was a Caribbean cruise.
Wow.
That was donated by one of the travel agencies. And then there was other prizes on down the line. And you couldn't cash your chips in when you were done anyway. I mean, as far as getting money back for them or anything. So you may as well just go for it. So it was down to the older guy and me, the last hand.
Wow.
And I had 2 kings and 2 queens. I'll never forget this. 2 pair, decent.
Yeah.
They weren't the best, but so I was pulling all my chips in because I thought, well, you can't take them with you anyway.
Yeah.
So he kept betting and raising it up, and finally we had to reveal our hands, and he had 3 5s.
Oh.
And by then I spent all my chips and didn't win anything. But he was so grateful. He said it was so much fun playing with me. He gave me my $100 entry fee back. A few years after that, the state decided that maybe this wasn't really legal. Because gambling wasn't legal in Colorado then. So they had to stop doing that. But that was pretty fun.
Yeah. Wow.
That was maybe a story you didn't have yet.
No, that's good. That's a neat way to raise money.
Yeah.
You don't see anymore.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Okay, you're welcome.